Welcome to Under the Radar, a show about independent iOS app development. I'm Marco Arment.
And I'm David Smith. Under the Radar is never longer than 30 minutes, so let's get started. So today, what we wanted to talk about, I'm not really sure what the right term for it is. The one that comes into my mind when I was thinking about this topic is transferable skills. Or generally, it's this feeling that I've been having recently about when I look at the various parts of making apps that aren't the actual sitting in Xcode, like writing code part. There's a lot of different skills and techniques and abilities that go into the actual like production of software. And a lot of them, I was noticing that the place that I learned that skill was very distinct from actual development. So as an example, recently when I launched Workouts++, I launched with a walkthrough video, which is sort of this long, sort of like 8 to 10 minute, sort of screen by screen walkthrough of the app. Then I also had made a little like shorter, like 30-second commercial. And I put these up on YouTube with the hope of trying to just kind of, it's this, if someone's on the fence about the app, especially because it's paid up front, that maybe they'd watch the video, get a sense of the app, and then decide, make an informed decision. And I realized that I was able to make these videos with fairly low effort and time, mostly because in the past I've messed around with making videos of other kinds, whether sort of like for personal projects and that kind of thing, or even if there was a period of time when I was doing like code tutorials on YouTube. I tried that. There was a few episodes of my old podcast, Developing Perspective, where I did them kind of like vlogs, where I'd like sat and looked into the camera and recorded it that way. And those projects never went anywhere. Like, they're not part of my business. They're not big and significant in that way. But by sitting down and like doing these things that are on the side, or sort of these orthogonal separate projects, what I keep finding time and time again is that I am building these skills that down the road I find, interesting. This is actually something that I need for my main job, so for making these videos or making app previews now. Like, I'm comfortable in Final Cut Pro, but not, which is useful to me now, but I did not just sit down and try and learn it for the actual job I do. And I find that this sort of pattern of having a rich set of side projects and little hobbies and things to try from time to time keeps coming back to inform my own work, like my primary job, again and again. And so it seemed like something that was worth discussing as an important skill for kind of developing yourself. And I think especially it's applicable as an independent developer, where I have to do so much of this myself. Like, I'm the one who is writing the code as well as the person who's making the promotional materials, and making the marketing videos and doing all these different things that maybe if I was at a big startup, there would be a marketing division that may have like a creative audiovisual person who really knows what they're doing and could probably make a better product than I could. But like, that's someone else's job. Whereas for me, like, that's my job.
Yeah. And it also, as indie developers, like we need a lot of the stuff to be done ourselves, because we often either don't have the contacts on hand to call to do things like this for us, and or we can't afford to have other people do it. Because like, when you're an indie, any expense that you spend on other people's labor is a lot of money, usually, like relative to what you're bringing in. Like, hiring contract workers, hiring services to make you things like videos and designers, this can be a substantial expense for indies, and often it is just completely not within the budget, or at least it would be way too big of a portion of the budget to make it probably not a good idea. So a lot of times you as an indie have to do a lot of this crazy stuff yourself. You have to be able to make, whip up a little like logo for things sometimes. You have to, like if the App Store asks you for promotional artwork for your app for possible featuring in the store, you have to design something that fits their requirements, which change over time and are always slightly different. So like, you can't just have a designer make something once and be done forever. Like, you have to be able to whip stuff together in that way for something that you might have to get done by like tomorrow at noon, or you kind of need to do this right now to have this opportunity or something like that. And things like, as you said, videos are another excellent example of like, if you have an app and Apple announces, hey, now you can do app previews in the App Store, if you already know the basics of how to cut together a video that looks halfway decent, that puts you way ahead of so many other people who will never do that, can't do that very well, or just would never even try because they would think it's impossible. And so to have that kind of transferable skill, as I said, just from side projects, it's incredibly valuable. I mean, and as you get older, I think it serves you well to add to that repertoire as much as you possibly can when you have the chance. So to do crazy side projects, to try out some new tool or some new medium or something else, try out new stuff, have little side projects, even if they don't go anywhere themselves, they will build up those skills in you, and you will probably need them at some point down the road.
Yeah, and I feel like, too, there's this interesting thing with these types of skills is that in some ways, like, the older I get, the more I understand that, like, there is certainly something to be said for being, like, super, super expert at something, like somebody who can do one thing extraordinarily well. Like, there's a value to that, both, in professionally, as a society, like, it's important for some people to go down that road. But I know for myself, what I found is that it's probably more applicable and flexible, to try to consciously develop a broad range of skills, to apply to different areas of your work. And so to be able to do lots of different things, I mean, it's helpful both obviously in terms of like, if you're trying to get a job, if you're trying to market yourself as something, like, it's great if you can do this one thing and that's exactly what someone's looking for. But if you're looking for a job and like you can do lots of things pretty well and be a quick learner of the other stuff, like, that's probably more attractive to a person. But it's also just, honestly, I find that it's more fun for me to have this kind of a perspective, a skill set and an ability to be able to try so many different things, and be able to do like a lot of things basically competently, not like, well, like the things that I can do in Photoshop or in Final Cut, are not fancy. They're not like, I'm not a graphic designer. I'm not a videographer or whatever, but I can do these things to enough of a level that it's fun and it's interesting and it's competent. Like, there's not just glaring mistakes and huge problems. And it's kind of a nice thing to be able to do that. And honestly, I think if it's part of what has allowed me to stay, interested and excited in the kind of work that I do. Like, I've been making iOS apps now for a very long time, and in many ways, I'm kind of not like bored with making iOS apps, but the core mechanics of making iOS apps is not the thing that is as nearly as exciting as all the various other things that go into being self-employed, especially. And like, it's fun to find these new things to try and pull into your work, to try something new and keep it fresh and interesting. That if you don't, I feel like I just get bored. And then I don't know what I'd do. I don't know what else I'd do. Like, this is certainly the skill that I have the most and would make sense for me to continue to pursue. But it's definitely something that I'm glad that I can add this diversity and sort of vibrancy into my work by looking for little side projects, by looking for little hobbies. And then in my own work, looking for, what can I take from this experience and put into, my own work.
It also just it gives your brain different outlets. So for different types of work and satisfaction and challenge and creativity, all these different types of work that we do serve those needs and provide different levels of fulfillment all differently. And so like for me, I make apps, and that satisfies like my programmer brain. I also do podcasts, and I edit them fairly creatively, and like that. And sometimes I even write blog posts, and these are all completely different types of creative or intellectual outlets. And like, if I don't do any one of them for a long time, like I'm not as satisfied. I'm not as intellectually satisfied and happy as if I'm satisfying all these different things, often. And then, I'll go in phases where I will get more or less into photography. And I recently even started doing video, attempts, and these are, this all serves multiple purposes. As you mentioned, like, it is nice to have just the break. But to me, it's also nice to be able to develop different parts of your creative and intellectual mind, and then to exercise and satisfy those in different ways.
Yeah, and you also it's also probably just it's a weird thing to say, but I feel like it's also a discipline to think of for yourself, of looking at our past experiences and trying to see if there are any things in there that like make us better at like the job at hand. So we're like, if I look at my job, it's like I'm trying to make apps, but I can look at my past experience, like what experiences do I have that would make me distinctly good at this, and where can I draw that from? And like it may come from things that aren't as obvious or aren't as like straightforward. Like in some ways, I recently have been doing a lot of health and fitness apps, and it's like some of that I'm drawing from obviously my own experience. I wouldn't say like I'm a huge person who like I'm like a gym rat who works out all the time, but I've had a fairly active lifestyle for quite a while, and it's like I can draw from those experiences to inform and make my products better. Whereas someone who didn't have that experience, who'd never gone to a gym in their life, couldn't really do the kind of apps that I do. And that's just an example of what are the things that we do in our lives that we could use as an unfair advantage. Because most of like being able to be successful, like it's always so often it is predicated on finding this little bit of leverage that is somewhat unique to us that we can apply in a way that gives us an unfair advantage over our competitors. Because if we're just all the same, then I guess it's just completely random who's going to win. But if you can find a reason that's just like, here's this thing that I can do. Like I'm the person who has an active lifestyle, who's been making mobile apps for a while. Apple introduces this new API. I jump in and dive into it and start using it. Like that narrows down the world of people who can do that thing. And so looking back at our lives and being like, what do we do? What are we interested in? Like, what hobbies do we have? What does that look like? Is really, I think, good bit of it's a mental discipline of like that introspection is probably a helpful thing to make sure that we're not like missing some skill or ability that we have that we could be leveraging somehow in our work.
Oh yeah, because like the business implication, so there was like the intellectual and creative satisfaction implications of having all these different skills. That's one thing. But as you mentioned, like the business side of this is also incredibly important. Because it goes beyond just like, what do I know that other people don't know about making a new type of app X, into like, if you have a bit more broad or varied or specialized perspective into the world, you will not only have skills that not every other iOS programmer has, but you will also be able to identify opportunities and identify new markets, new kinds of apps that can be made, or markets that are incredibly underserved or badly served by what's out there now. You will see those before the whole rest of the world will ever see them, because you'll already be in that world. Like every time I go to the dentist, I always laugh at like how incredibly bad their software looks on the screen that's in the cleaning rooms. And it's like Windows 95 software, and I'm just like, not a lot of iOS developers are dental hygienists, and so they don't see this. This is a totally underserved market, and if you happen to be an iOS developer who's also a dental hygienist, you would see this, and you might be able to make better software that would help this market. And that's an area where almost no one's competing, right? And so like this is like, there's so many different things. Like almost everybody has some need or hobby or skill in their life that is fairly unusual among other developers, and use that. Like one of the reasons I was able to develop all the Overcast audio filtering stuff a couple years ago is that I've been playing with audio my entire life. Like I've always been obsessed with audio. I was doing compression analysis and weird like attempts at horrible hacks and audio processing since long before I was an iOS developer. I've just always loved it. I've always messed with it. I've always, done a lot of research about it and known a lot about it. And, it's just one of these things like that helped me out tremendously. I could also take a decent picture sometimes. And so when I made Instapaper and I needed an icon and I had no money to give anybody else to make me an icon, I just took a pretty good picture of the pages of a book and I put like a little stupid Photoshop border around it. And in retrospect, it looked terrible, but it was good enough for the time. Like, it was totally fine. and I didn't have any other choice. I couldn't afford a designer at that time. So I just did what I could with my existing skills, put it out there, and it worked fine. It was good enough. And, same thing like with screenshots, with a lot of icon design that I do inside the app. Like, now, like, I still have my app icon that was designed by a real designer, Louis Mantia, but all the icons that are in the app, I've designed myself, because that's good enough for my purposes. Like, I've developed that skill to be good enough, and it works. And then I'm able to make new icons, to make adjustments, to change things like colors and thickness and alignment and everything else, to make little tweaks without having to go back and forth to a designer and pay a bunch of money, because I have this skill now. Like, basically, the smartest thing you can do with these skills is like find ways to rope them into your business wherever possible. So that's not to say that that you shouldn't have anything that's just randomly fun, but if you have other skills that could be useful in your business, or like if you're looking to develop some kind of visual artistry skill and you happen to make iOS apps, well, you know what? You have a really great opportunity right there to tie those things together and to design the stuff in your app using your newfound visual artistry skills. Like, there are lots of opportunities that you will have as a developer to integrate multiple skills in. And I think what we're saying in this episode is you really should, and you should consider learning different types of skills or experimenting with different types of things that could benefit your apps. We are sponsored this week by Zojo. Go to zojo.com, that's xojo.com, xojo.com/radar to find more, and listeners of the show can get 20% off any license with code RADAR20. Zojo is a cross-platform development tool for creating native apps for desktop, mobile, web, and even the Raspberry Pi. I'll tell you what, Raspberry Pi, I have never used one of those things, but I really want to. This is another skill that I feel like I should probably develop, because it's like this little computer for like $30, and it's just, oh man, the opportunities there are endless. Anyway, Zojo will help you develop cross-platform apps, desktop, mobile, web, and Raspberry Pi. They currently support Mac OS, Windows, Linux, iOS, and coming soon even Android. With Zojo, you can write just one version of your app, say on the Mac, for instance, and then you can just check a checkbox and have a completely native Windows version as well. It really is that simple. Zojo uses native controls, so your app looks at home on every platform that it runs on. You'll be able to build apps 10 times faster, which will save you time and money. And this is also especially useful for indie developers right here, because you can't afford like a separate Android and iOS department. No, you can just use Zojo, write one app, and you can cover all these different platforms. It is great for everyone, newbies to professional developers. It's currently used by over 300,000 developers worldwide, from students to Fortune 500 companies. So go take a look at their site. You will see just how many companies you recognize who use Zojo. And it's free to use. And you just need a license if you want to build a standalone application. So like you can try it out, you can develop with it for free, but if you want to build a standalone app, you need a license. Go to zojo.com, that's xojo.com/radar to find out more. And listeners of the show can get 20% off any license with code RADAR20. Once again, zojo.com/radar, code RADAR20. Thank you so much to Zojo for their support of this show.
So given the benefits that we're kind of extolling about having side projects and having these things that you do to kind of build a breadth of skills and experiences, something that does come to mind to me, though, is the difficulty often in starting a new project. And so I think it made sense to wrap this up by kind of talking about that process of having an idea for a project, a side thing, and then actually making it happen. And like what comes to mind to me is like for a long time, I've always been a long time lover of podcasts, and I would listen to podcasts all the time, and it was just like a big part of my day. And I always had in the back of my mind, like, oh man, I should get into that. I should make a podcast. I should do something for myself. And for a long time, I didn't. And the advice that I actually ended up getting, I think pretty sure this was from Back to Work, from Merlin Mann, is he was like, if you have something in your mind that you keep saying to yourself, like, oh, one day I'll do this, one day I'll learn how to do that, one day I'll kind of go through and build that discipline. It's like, what you really need to do is just make a time-bound goal and do that thing on a regular basis for that time. And then at the end, you can decide, is this actually something I like? Do I enjoy it? Or am I just sort of having this dream that I'm going to love it and I'll actually try it and I'll hate it. And so for me, like I started the podcast I did before Under the Radar, Developing Perspective. I started it with this terrible Logitech USB headset microphone. Like don't buy into the lie that you need all this equipment or you need all these fancy things before you can start. Like you can almost certainly start with just like what you have. Like your smartphone can do almost everything you could ever possibly need for a creative project. And so just like go with that. And what I just said is like, okay, I'm going to do an episode every day for, I think I said about 3 weeks. And so I did, which was 15 episodes, 30 minutes, or that was 15 minutes or less. And so like, I'm just going to do 15-minute episodes. And if I can do that, and I get to the end of it, like I can buy myself a good mic and so on. Like at that point, if I decide that I want to do it, but I found it was really helpful to look at a project like that and say, it's like, I just need to commit to it, try it. And then if I like it, great. If not, I can move on. For me, it turned out podcasting was great. I enjoyed it. And, I did Developing Perspective for 3 or 4 years, and I've been doing Under the Radar for over a year now. Like, podcasting is something that has been useful for my career in terms of building a bit of a brand and a personality online, as well as it's like useful in other weird ways. Like I said, I did a walkthrough video for Workouts Plus, and it involved a voiceover. I'm like doing this voiceover work as I show how to use the app. I did all of the voiceover work in one take, mostly because I have done podcasts for so long that speaking in an uninterrupted, kind of hopefully vaguely coherent way is fairly natural now. And similarly, like having started podcasting, the prospect of doing public speaking was a lot less scary. Like I used to think that was just like absolutely terrifying, that I'd be standing up on stage and I just would have no words and I would just be standing there, sort of dumbstruck with nothing to say. I'm less worried about that now because I've built the muscle and the skill of sitting down in front of a microphone and just talking for a while. And I got all that out of started actually just deciding that, yes, I'm going to try this. I'm going to try it and I'm going to start it. And then I did start it. And then, it worked out. And if I'd gotten to the end of that 15 episodes and said, you know what, podcasting's not for me, it's like, okay, that's great. Now I know that for sure, rather than kind of like kidding myself about one day, maybe sometime, if I'm lucky, if I have time, when I'm less busy, I'll be able to do it. Like, though that day is never going to come. And so if it actually isn't important to you, you just need to one day decide, yes, I'm going to do this, make it time bound and short. So you're not actually kidding yourself and saying, I'm going to do this for a year. It's like, no, like maybe you'll do it for a couple of weeks. And if you can do it for that amount of time, maybe you'll want to do it for longer.
Yeah. I'd also say that it helps a lot to, not only to develop these skills and to be creatively satisfied and to find new markets for apps and everything. It also helps to use what you have when choosing what to build in your apps. Use the skills that you have, use the experience, the wisdom, the equipment, if that's important, to use what you have and to choose what to work on based on that. So, for instance, I have now a lot of knowledge about MP3s, audio, podcasting, how to process audio, how to edit and create podcasts, how to play podcasts. So I am in a unique position here that most iOS developers are not in to do additional projects such as the MP3 encoder I'm working on, the chapter tool that I'm working on, and also possibly down the road, a podcast editor app. Like, those are all projects that should be on my roadmap, and some of them are, but those are all things that like it would be an interesting idea and probably a good idea for me to leverage what I have. As you said, your wonderful leverage word familiar. Leverage the knowledge and experience and code that I have to direct my future efforts. Right? It wouldn't make as much sense for my next app to be like a calendar app, because I would have no advantage over anybody else in making a calendar app. I have none of my experience leads to that. I have no existing code, no existing domain knowledge there. Like, I would have to basically be relearning everything just like anybody else. Whereas if I made an audio editor, that's like a really big, complex thing that you could charge real money for, probably. But most people couldn't just jump into that. If anyone else wanted to make that, they would have to first spend a while learning what I already know, building code I've already written, and getting experience I already have. So like as I'm choosing what to work on next, I have to think about like, what is a good idea for me to work on next? And that goes into other things. Like I know how to market things that are related to podcasts. I know I have an audience that cares about such things. I can, there's some kind of opportunities for integrations between what I already have and a podcast related thing. Whereas if I make a calendar app next, I have nothing. I start from zero. And so it really helps to use what you have to help choose what goes into your portfolio at all. I mean, you're really good at this. Everything you do recently has had a substantial watch and fitness component because you're really good at watch stuff and fitness stuff.
Yeah. And seeing that, like, has, in a weird way, I've had to make peace with that. Like, that you kind of have, in my mind, I kind of look at the world with, like, there's so many different types of development that I could want to get into. That there's so many things that I could, like, in terms of like a calendar app. Like I have ideas for a calendar app. Like I have an idea for almost every app.
Of course.
Like I have a massive list of things that are like someday maybe I'd love to build. I had taken a little bit of kind of, I don't even know, like understanding to just look at myself and be like, you know what I should do though? I should make the things that I'm uniquely good at and the things that I have some more skills and experience at, because while it could be interesting and fun to like make the other kind of crazy app and go in that direction, like the reality is I'm probably wasting my time if I go in that way. Whereas if I do something that I have these abilities and skills in, then I'm not. And it's also in a weird way, like I think when I think about transferable skills, like I think about how in a weird way, it's kind of a relief because it takes past failings or things that didn't really work out, and lets you look at them in a more positive light. That like, so I think about like I did this YouTube video series about like teaching. I think it was like teaching people how to make watch apps. It was this idea that I had. I put it on YouTube and a lot of people would watch it, and it would be big and exciting. And this new line of sort of like business for me, but like a new big thing for me. And it went nowhere. Like hardly anybody watched them. It was ostensibly like a failure. But if I can look at it instead from a perspective of like take that experience, break it down into the skills that I learned as a result from that. Like the learned skills are never a failure. Like the outcomes may have been failed, like they didn't go anywhere and they didn't really do anything. But the things that I learned in the process of doing it is never wasted. If I can find a place to then put that into my work, and then now I can look at my work now and say, yeah, it's like here's the things that I can do. I'm going to make things that work and that focus into that used all these abilities that I've been building up over time, often out of things that didn't work out in the past, and then, apply that into a new way. And that just increases the odds. Because ultimately none of these are like guaranteed ways to be successful. Like it's like all we can do is just like turn the dial up slightly so that like we have a slightly better chance of being successful. We have a slightly better chance of making something, like impressive and awesome.
And this also goes towards diversity of income and resilience of your financial independence too. Because like as you develop these other skills that are separate from the raw iOS app development core skill that you're making your business, you then make it easier not only for you to have alternate income streams if you get good enough at any of these things that you could actually make them side businesses, but also when the next big thing comes along, suppose the next big thing is some kind of combination of iOS apps, video production, and icon design. Like, if you already have like the pieces necessary, you can jump right into the next thing, the next kind of thing that comes around faster and better than other people can who are starting from scratch or who have totally unrelated skills. It really, like, all of these things that we've been talking about like how to basically be like us, or at least how we'd like to be, these all fit together. This is all part of one big puzzle here, that if you have diverse skills from different areas that you can bring together to make your iOS apps, and possibly also have different audience growth from them, or different revenue growth or revenue diversity from them, that all fits together into making a successful indie developer. All right. And with all that said, we're out of time this week. Thank you very much, everybody, for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.
Bye.